It's the weekend, so you know what time it is. It's time to go over the Mythic Raid Testing that happened in the last couple of days. We have 3 more Mythic bosses that were tested, much like we did last week when we looked at Gnarlroot and the results of the DPS performance on the PTR, and then Igira, and then Council. Now we can do the same for 3 more bosses, these being Lardar, Volcaros, and Tindral. Now, what makes looking at the PTR results important isn't just to see the damage the specs are doing, but also to see the impact of the tuning, because for example, what you see here happened in between the 2 testing from last week to this week, and on top of that, this one happened as well. We had 2 rounds of tuning happening in between. So you have, for example, further changes to Havoc, you had the change to Augmentation, the ones to Shadow Priest, the ones to the Rogues, further changes to Demo. The one before that, you had, of course, continued heavy changes to Havoc, you had a big set of changes to Mistweaver, you also had continued once more changes to Demo as well as to Enhancement. So, of course, the good part of checking the logs in the PTR is to also see what are the changes, what are the effects of the balance tuning that is happening in the PTR. So, we left last week looking at, for example, how overpowered the cleave of Elemental was after the tier set was changed. Now we start with the first boss being Lardar, which is a mostly single target fight, with some 10 to 15% of the damage to the trees that spawn that you have to kill before your healers are gonna heal them up. Well, you can immediately see the results here are all in favor of Demo. Demo has been overall the more changed of the specs in the past couple of weeks. If you look at here, you have all of these changes followed by all of these changes. Quite a few of these were positive. Blizzard started giving you back more demon power with these new talents being added, buffing your primary Felguard with Soul Strike as a default ability, plus an extra talent to do more Soul Strike damage. Initially, your Balskor Bombers were also significantly buffed, as well as the AoE damage of your Summon Vilefiend to now have Caustic Presence to pulse AoE damage around you. In the following tuning, the Caustic Presence of the Vilefiend was heavily nerfed to do less AoE damage, but you were given some significant compensation buffs. For example, now your tier set explosion damage is buffed by 150%, and the Doomfiend that can spawn from the tier set is also buffed in damage by 150%. This has created quite a significant shift in the damage of Demo. If you look at the current version of Demo, this is a Magmorax log, you can see that your primary Felguard is at about 12% damage. Now, in a single target fight on single target damage, your Felguard is doing 27% of your damage. What you can also see is that your Tyrant right now on live is your major, as you can see here, your major part of your damage, which is 12%. In the PTR, your Tyrant is shit. Another change is, of course, the tier set. Now you have a buffed Doomfiend that spawns from your tier set doing over 8% of your damage, and the explosion, the Doom brand itself, doing 3.6. This brings your tier set for most of these logs to do about 12-ish% of your damage. Now, if we go back to look at our tier sims from Aberrus, the difference from not having a tier set and having 4 pieces, if your tier set has 12% damage increase, it's very high. As you can see from the averages in here, 12% would put you around the 4th to 5th best tier set out of DPS specs. So it's now a powerful, a respectable tier set for Demo. What might be annoying for Demo, besides the gameplay, which is still somewhat clunky-er compared to before, is also this bit about the tier set of Demo, which is the fact that even with the power of this demon that can spawn from the tier, when Doombrand explodes, you have a chance to summon this demon. It's a chance, it's not guaranteed. If you look at, for example, the instances of damage of Doombrand, which is, supposed to explode and give you a chance to spawn the demon, and then you look at the actual damage done by the demon, this is the result. It's completely RNG, and you have to go many times where your tier set will explode once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you are just drawing a blank, and your demon is not spawning. Same goes after this, 1 to 3 times goes for broke. that might be quite frustrating, especially when you want to have some burst damage, you are relying on your demon and it's not spawning because it's RNG. That is perhaps a bit annoying for Demo. Maybe lower the damage of the demon but increase the chance to spawn, so you have a more stable set of spawns of this demon and are not nearly as RNG. Now, besides Demo, however, you can see as the best performing ones specs that we've also mentioned in our last week's PTR testing. You have, for example, Beast Mastery, that continues to be one of the better performing ones. We were also mentioning last week specs like Elemental, like Havoc, like Retribution, Enhancement, and Outlaw. They are all still there. The extra addition compared to last week is Augmentation, because now you do have working hooks, working damage logs in the PTR as well. If we go back, for example, to the first week where Augmentation was towards the bottom, now the logs have been updated. Now Augmentation is towards the top, even on the logs of Gnarlroot. If we go to Council, the Cleave boss, you can see Augmentation now is also towards the top. So now the damage of Augmentation is being reflected properly in the PTR, and it's actually doing amongst the better damage profiles. That's worth pointing out, just in case players were starting to wonder why Augmentation was being so weak and towards the bottom. That was just the PTR not counting properly the Augmentation's buff damage. What we also see around here is we continue to see Frost, for example, being one of the better performers for Mage. We continue to see some of the specs at the bottom, despite the reworks of the specs like Assassination and Subtlety. We continue to have a dominance of Outlaw when it comes to Rogues, even through the reworks of the other two Rogue specs. They don't seem to be doing nearly as well. Surprising to see Feral this low. We have praised last week Feral. On Gnarlroot, they were towards the top half of the results. On Igira, they were in the top. In Council, which was a cleave fight, they were doing worse, understandably. But even this one, which is a more single target heavy fight, they are not doing nearly as well. And it's not that they were nerfed. Yes, they were changed a bit in the first round of tuning before this set of testing. Apex Predator being weaker in single target and Relentless Predator being weaker as well, but definitely not nearly enough to make this much of a dent on the performance of Feral. What is also interesting, also by looking at the top guilds, for example, testing this boss, is the split between Augmentation and Devastation, which is now much more even. In case you have missed it, nowadays Augmentation has basically completely eaten the space of Devastation over time. Even if you go at the popularity of the specs, you can find Augmentation all towards the top, and then Devastation has been just dropping down further and further down. Meanwhile, on the PTR we have seen a much more even split of logs between Devastation and Augmentation, also thanks to, of course, the performance at the moment of Devastation. After Larodar, which wasn't completely single target, we have Volkoros testing, which is a completely single target fight. Now, this fight in general lasted less in the testing, about 2 to 3 minutes for most groups. We can, however, see more of the same. Now we start having an even more solid pattern to our results, because we see Demo, Outlaw, Beast Mastery, Enhancement, Havoc, and Ret. Once again, we can also add Augmentation to the mix. The couple of extras in here are Unholy and Balance. We haven't mentioned Balance for Larodar, but Balance was also towards the top half of Larodar as well. If we go back to the previous bosses, we had Council, where Balance was the second best. We have Igira, where Balance was doing towards the bottom, and then Gnarlroot, where Balance was also towards the top half. So overall, Balance has also been doing quite well. However, as I mentioned, you do start having a repeating pattern now. You have quite a few of the same specs being now towards the top. And if you have a repeating pattern towards the top, it might be likely that the repeating pattern also happens towards the bottom. You can see specs we have mentioned before, like for example Windwalker, like Arms Warrior, like Affliction. Once more, Feral Druid actually continues their bad performance in this second round of tuning. What might be more surprising is a spec we mentioned being the better performing one of their class, which was Frost, who is now doing much worse than Arcane and Fire. Although this might have to do with the very few logs of Frost. As you can see here, the testing was basically terrible. They were basically doing less than tank damage, so we can't put too much importance into that. It's also true you have to take the logs with the duration in mind. The shorter the fight is, the strongest cooldowns will have more value. So if a fight only lasts a couple of minutes, for example, you are of course going to have a Unholy DK having a lot of overall damage because they are pushing 600,000 DPS on pull. So if the fight only lasts a couple of minutes, then you're gonna show up at a much higher DPS compared to logs where the fight can go on for 5 minutes, where your big burst on pull is going to have a much weaker power overall, right? So that is also part of the reason why Unholy can show up this high on this particular fight. This is shown even more clearly on the last testable boss, which was completely overtuned and basically just a waste, but it's still useful for logs. Why? Because basically the boss was killing every group after 30 to 35 seconds. As you can see, the fight length, it's about 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds, and then everyone dies. Reason for this is that the boss traps all the raid in some vines, and basically you need to have the DPS to break these vines to stay alive. The result was not many groups were able to do that. However, what this can be useful for us is to show us the burst damage of the players, because now you have basically a bunch of logs which are Bloodlust, Potion, Trinket, all your cooldowns in the first 30 seconds before you die. And of course, it's not a surprise that in this setting, Unholy is first. In this setting we also see Demo still, but also Arcane Mage. Arcane Mage is a spec that we haven't really mentioned often because their performance has been, average. Their performance has been okay, but nothing special, especially not even better than their counterparts in Mage, so it's mostly forgettable. But in here, when you can look at the burst damage, of course, Arcane is much more respectable. What is perhaps also a surprise is that even in this burst damage setting, for example, Fire Mage is not doing nearly as well. Elemental, that we have mentioned being one of the better performers together with Enhancement, together with Outlaw, these are not doing very well in burst, particularly in burst AoE. What might be surprising is Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery has not been traditionally a spec you attach to high burst DPS in AoE. Actually, Beast Mastery has not been a spec you associate with burst at all, because they have traditionally not had a lot. However, as you can see here, nowadays they kind of do, with the changes to their talents and the uptime of their Dire Beasts and their normal beasts, plus Beast Cleave, plus Kill Command and Kill Cleave to give you more AoE damage. This is now the result. As soon as the little vines are spawning and they can use their Beast Cleave, they are pushing over 1 million DPS over the course of 10 seconds with this damage, which is, quite a surprising amount of damage for a spec who supposedly has not had traditionally a lot of DPS in burst windows. This is a big help for the viability of Beast Mastery in the next tier, both for the raid but also for Mythic Plus, because of the burst damage and how important it is in Mythic Plus. But even looking at this from a raiding perspective, it is still doing very well. Other specs, as mentioned, you're not nearly as surprised to be told they are doing well in burst situations. Unholy, Arcane, Demo, Augmentation, even Ret are kind of expected, but Beast Mastery was definitely not on the cards when talking about burst, even just in this live patch, really. That's another change that's bound to happen in 10.2 when it comes to changes in, damage profiles, how the specs are doing their damage. That's a big change for Beast Mastery. So this is quite interesting because at the moment, with the Blizzard's own schedule, we don't have any other planned sets of testing in Mythic raiding, or even just raiding in general. Their schedule stopped at this last weekend. So for now, technically, that's all we have as far as testing goes in the raid. We have, at this point, seen enough testing from enough different bosses to be able to draw a conclusion of some of the better performing specs overall, simply due to how often they show up in the better performers, in the better results in the raid. At this point, we can mention specs like Havoc, like Beast Mastery, Outlaw, Demo, Augmentation, now with working logs, Balanced Druid, Enhancement, Red Paladin, even Fury Warrior and Shadow Priest, we can more or less all bump up together towards the top half of performers. Also Devastation Evoker can find a spot in there. And then you have the bottom half of the specs we haven't mentioned nearly as much, or we have mentioned doing very poorly. For example, Marksmanship Hunter is still one of the worst overall specs in terms of performance. You still have Assassination and Subtlety Rogue, you have Fire Mage, you have Arcane Mage, you also have Affliction Warlock and Destruction Warlock. These specs are not doing nearly as well so far in PTR testing. Assuming that's the end of it, assuming we don't have any more testing on the PTR, that's how we are stopping before we go over to the release of the patch. No matter whether or not we're gonna be getting any more sets of testing on the PTR, we will still see some changes before the release of Season 3. But for now, that is all we have as far as tuning is concerned in the PTR, with the last set of testing for Mythic Raid bosses. So on this Sunday, it's time to leave each other once more. We are thanking as usual all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can still be done as usual for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these superfluous things out of the way, it's time to leave each other because I have to go out to shop for some groceries. So thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, no, for real, this video went on long enough. It's even a couple minutes longer than I wanted, so stop right here.